My name is Franziska, and I will give you a quick presentation about our paper titled InnoDev Workshop, a one-day introduction to combining design thinking, lean startup, and agile software development. In this talk, I'll give you a quick introduction to the topic, tell you something about the InnoDev framework, introduce you to our research setup, then give you an overview of our workshop and all the parts involved, explain how the participants experienced the workshop, and then close the talk with a discussion and a summary. Important question to software teams and managers is how can we improve the software development process? Various process frameworks have been developed in different fields. Agile software development, for example, is already common in many software companies. And techniques such as extreme programming, Kanban boards, Scrum, or retrospectives help teams to organize their development while changing requirements. Lean startups from the area of entrepreneurship aims to add customer and business development alongside the agile development. It proposes to frequently test features and products in a minimum viable version and to constantly analyze performance metrics to understand how users are using a product. Another important aspect of Lean Startup is the business model innovation, which aims to develop a business model while developing the product, for example, by using the Lean Canvas. Design thinking looks at the software development process from a design perspective. It proposes to make use of interview and observation techniques to understand user needs or to make use of personas as typical users during development and testing. It also promotes techniques such as brainstorming or prototyping for idea development together with the customer or within the team. The three approaches complement each other very well as they address different aspects that are important to developing a successful product. Accordingly, companies often use a combination of these approaches. But there is a lack of understanding how design thinking, lean startup, and agile software development can be successfully intertwined, and how software practitioners can be guided when combining these processes. For my research, we developed InnoDev, which is a process framework that aims to intertwine design thinking, lean startup, and agile software development. In short, it consists of three phases: the conceptualizing the product phase, the building an initial product and business phase, and the scaling the product and the business phase. During the first phase, design thinking is used to understand the user needs and develop product vision. During this phase, testing concepts and metrics as proposed by Lean Startup can help to support idea validation and prototype testing. During the second phase, this product vision is developed into a minimum viable version along with a suitable business model. This phase makes use of prototyping and testing techniques from design thinking and Lean Startup. At the end of the second phase, a proof of concept or initial product should have been developed. In the third phase, this prototype is further developed into a full product and the technology stack and business model are adapted accordingly. Design thinking takes on a supporting role during this phase, while lean startup and agile development techniques become more important. Throughout the whole process, Scrum-like project management supports the team in planning and running development sprints. It was our goal to support IT professionals in learning how to intertwine design thinking, Scrum, and lean startup and integrate them into their existing software development processes. Accordingly, our research study is split into parts. First, we developed a workshop based on the InnoDev model, and then we evaluated the workshop with participants from the software industry. With the development of the workshop, we wanted to create a training format that introduces the basics of design thinking, Scrum, and lean startup, and provides guidance on how these approaches can be combined and intertwined. The training was developed based on a literature review of existing combined approaches, suggested important methods from each of these approaches, and existing research on trainings for software development practitioners. To evaluate our workshop, we ran 3 instances, one in Galway, Ireland, one in California in the US, and one in Potsdam in Germany. A total of 31 participants from 23 different companies took part. We collected mixed method data. We observed the teams while they were running through our workshop and completing the task. We collected artifacts, for example, pictures of whiteboards and notes and notebooks. We did group interviews. So the workshop was split into 3 sprints, and after each sprint, we would do a group interview with all the participants about how they experienced the sprint, how the methods that they worked on worked for them, and how they could use these within their own companies. So we ran 9 group interviews in total, and after each workshop, we asked a group of participants to fill out a survey to rate the workshop. So let me give you an introduction to our workshop format. We designed the InnoDev workshop as a one-day workshop in order to offer a low threshold for practitioners to participate. As we built our contents based on the InnoDev model, we decided to split the day into 3 sprints, each sprint representing one of the InnoDev phases. This sprints concept should make participants already familiar with the idea of using sprints and agile project management throughout the process, even for ideation or conceptualization activities. The goal of the first sprint is to dive into the topic, understand the needs of the users or possible users, and create a product vision. As we were running a one-day workshop, we didn't invite any actual users, but asked the participants to interview each other and also to test with each other. So for activities during this first sprint, we started with a quick planning session to have a project and a sprint plan. Then we went into an understand and observe phase where the team discussed and collected their different experiences around the challenge. Then we asked them to synthesize what they learned in this discussion into different insights, categorize needs, and then create a point of view and a persona based on what they had heard. With this point of view and the persona in mind, they were asked to silently brainstorm and then share and have another group brainstorming about possible solutions that could help this persona and their need. Following was a prototyping session where we asked them to do a tangible but lo-fi testable prototype, something like a paper UI, a storyboard, and then they were asked to cross-test their prototypes with one of the other teams in the workshop and collect feedback in a feedback capture grid. To add a different approach, we asked them to create an experiment design for a quantitative test of their idea with the test card, which would be more in the direction of a lean startup test, where you have quantifiable metrics that you can follow up on. And we ended the sprint with a review and retrospective and used the start, stop, continue method to get feedback on the sprint and the teamwork and the techniques. Second sprint, the goal was to create an MVP and also come up with a business model that could be used with this MVP. So for the techniques, we started again with a planning session to have a sprint plan. Then as a transition activity from the concept into actually building something, we asked the team to follow a user story mapping to decide on the most essential features and have them as user stories ready for development. Then we asked them to try themselves with a lean canvas and come up with a business model. And then think about how they could test this business model. Again, a test card was used for the experiment design, followed by MVP development, where they should discuss in a team which functionalities they would want to develop as a high fidelity prototype. Then they would do the prototyping and again test with one of the other teams to collect feedback. And the final task before another review and retro was then to think about metrics that could be tracked when actually releasing such an MVP to understand usage and behavior of actual users. For the third and final sprint, the goal was to further think about developing the MVP that they had from the second sprint into a full-fledged product. Naturally, we couldn't have the teams actually develop or program because we just had one day, but we asked them to create various prototypes and then think about them as actual developed MVPs. Again, the sprint started with a planning session and then followed by a team discussion in which the team should discuss which features should be added or changed according to the feedback they had received in the testing before. Then they had some time to increment their high fidelity prototype and either add a new feature or change some features of the prototype that they already had. Again, a cross-test with another team would lead to further feedback. And we also asked them again for a test card and an experiment design for more quantitative tests. We closed this sprint with another review and retrospective to gain more feedback on the sprint and the teamwork and the techniques. If you're interested in a more concrete example, the paper describes the process of one team through all these sprints, including discussions, ideas, and concrete outcomes of their discussions. So, how did the participants experience our workshop? Here you can see a journey map for the workshop, which we based on a free template from Carrie Bodine and based on the feedback we got in the group discussions and group interviews. So basically most people started into the workshop with a little bit of knowledge about mostly Agile. Some had either seen design thinking or lean, but mostly just heard about it. They had a nice introduction with each other, and the initial introduction of InnoDev and what we were trying to achieve with the workshop made a lot of sense to them. Then when the first sprint started and they saw the product plan, they immediately thought there's not enough time, the challenge is too vague, we cannot do anything, it's going to be a stressful day. But when they arrived at the prototyping task, they started to have fun and they started to feel more passionate about their solutions. Feedback in most of the sprints was constructive, but they received some critique. Yeah, they then went through the different activities. They started some planning for sprint 2. The lean canvas was received very well. The MVP, they had fun to build, but they were also forced to be more specific than in their initial prototype and become more concrete. They found it challenging to think about metrics, but also thought that it is a good idea to have such metrics. And then going into sprint through, we've got some feedback that they can start to understand why managers act in a certain way when they started thinking about business models and how to actually market a product, and that it helped them get an idea of what other people involved in the project have to think about. Again, thinking about new features and more prototyping was fun. And in the summary and closing, we heard that people found they had a big learning curve throughout the project, and that they can think about this further, and that a lot of them actually think they can take away something and take this into their own companies. Looking at the survey results we received from our participants, we can see that participants rated our workshop positively for utility and that they think the process in the workshop could be of value within their company. They also gave a positive rating for coherence. So what we told them was logic and consistent to them. And we received a bit of negative ratings for clarity. They don't really see how they can adopt all of this in their company, which is also in line with some of the comments that we received, that they're not completely sure what to take into their companies, but they have some idea that some methods could be useful. And also the forecast item wasn't rated so good, that InnoDev provides an approach to better calculate and estimate for future events. Looking at our observation notes, we noticed that actually the planning wasn't that much helpful because we have already planned so much for the workshop that the team itself didn't do any planning. So the planning session was more of an, this is what we are going to do now, and less of an actual planning. So this might have something to do with this rating. What do we take away from our workshops and our study? Overall, the participants were happy with our workshop. They felt like they gained some new knowledge. They discussed that the techniques that they learned about were easy to understand and pitched at the right level. They feel that they could be helpful in their software development processes. However, they are not exactly sure how to integrate this in the processes that are already available at the companies. So participants actually wished for more time at the end of the workshop to get into concrete discussions about what and how they can do in their own companies with the given processes and given products. The participants mentioned the presentation and the materials we provided them with positively as also practical resources where they can look things up again when they're back in their companies. And we think that with the materials pack we provide and the knowledge from the study, we provide researchers and practitioners with the opportunity to replicate our workshop in other companies and spread the knowledge. Looking at our discussions and observation notes, we find that the planning steps in all 3 sprints did not work out at all, mostly because we already had a plan for them and they didn't have anything to plan. So for future workshops, we would probably just explain how an agile planning should work and then tell them that for the workshop we had already done everything for them because the time is limited. And also we noticed that the workshop environment was actually really important for the workshop to run smoothly. We had 2 workshops that were held in more of an office setting where we had created team spaces, but the tables were actual normal desks with normal sitting chairs. And in these workshops, participants had good team discussions, but they would just take notes in their playbooks and not make use of the whiteboards we provided for them. And then we had a 3rd workshop that was held in an actual design thinking space, fully featuring stand-up desks, whiteboards. And here the participants would look at the playbook, but actually work as a team on the whiteboard as we had initially intended. And in the other workshops, we had to constantly remind the teams to get onto the whiteboard and write there instead of each one writing in their playbooks. So that was interesting to see. Yeah, looking at the limitations, we only did 3 workshops with a total of 31 participants, all in Western culture, and also mostly males. So cultural and gender differences might have affected some of our findings. And we also did not look into what the participants actually took away from our workshop and used in their companies. So we are planning a follow-up study right now to understand how the participants transferred the knowledge and the materials into their work back at home. Also, the 1-day workshop had a lot of timing issues. Naturally, you don't have a lot of time, you have a lot of content to cover. So time pressure was repeatedly mentioned, but positive and negatively by the participants. But none of the participants asked for a longer workshop. So nobody said, let's have a 2 or 3-day workshop. And they actually asked for more content in the 1 day with the discussion about how to apply these things in different company settings. So we still think, after running the workshops, that a 1-day workshop is a sufficient way to introduce the basic contents we aim for, and then probably should be followed by different workshops or mentoring inside the companies to follow up on questions and things that will come up. So to summarize, we presented a 1-day training workshop that introduces the basics of design thinking, Scrum, and Lean Startup, and how these 2 approaches can be intertwined following the InnoDev approach. Our results indicate that this 1-day training is a good means to introduce a multidisciplinary and complex innovation approach to software engineers, even though it is quite short and can only communicate basics. The participants had a positive experience in our workshop. They became aware of new tools and techniques they hadn't tried out before that could be applied to software development, and they perceived these tools and the combination of the 3 innovation approaches as applicable and beneficial to their companies. However, there was some question about how they could actually move forward with following some of the techniques and approaches inside their companies. Yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know. You can contact me with my email address, and thank you very much for your attention. Bye.